houses, we are touring homes, we're doing listing appointments, we're doing this stuff on a regular basis, which means that we are going in and out of houses all the time, and we're getting feedback from people when we're touring these houses, right? And so where you may think, oh, like if I make this specific change or this specific upgrade, that's going to bump up my value. We know, based on what the market's telling us and based on what our clients are saying and feedback from different listings, we know exactly how that upgrade may be received on the market. And we can let you know, hey, just so you know, buyers are not valuing this particular feature as highly as you think they are, right? And so welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we will be discussing how in the world do you price a house? When most home buyers are looking to purchase a home or looking to get into the market, one of their biggest concerns right out of the gate, and rightfully so, is, am I going to pay too much for this house, right? Or am I going to overpay? Is it going to be something that I look down the road and really regret the price that I paid, and is that going to cause issues down the road, right? We're always trying to figure that out. And so I wanted to take some time to break down not only what factors we use to help us price homes, but more importantly, what things you should not keep in mind, right? Or what things that you do not need to focus on, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of algorithms, a lot of opinions. You got family members, you got all these people in your ear, all this information out there, and you're just trying to get to the root of, okay, what exactly is this house worth? And so I'm going to talk about 6 key factors that we often look at when we're trying to determine what a home is worth. I've said it before, and I'll say it many times again. When it comes to the market and what's happening for a value of a home, the market is always going to determine that value, right? Agents, we do what we call CMAs, comparative market analysis, to help determine or what we believe a home is worth. Appraisers, they will do an appraisal report showing their opinion or their best guess. But at the end of the day, those are just educated guesses. Those are our opinions based on the other facts, but they're still opinions because, again, the market is always going to dictate what a home is worth. We're just using our tools and resources to try to predict what the market is going to say. I heard someone say one time, they talked about how the appraisers are historians, but realtors are more so of fortune tellers, right? Appraisers are strictly focused on what has happened in the past, right? What has happened with other sales? Were there any pertinent factors that changed what might have happened, right? Was there something weird that went on, something fishy? Was it the foreclosure? Was it something that went down that made that deal unlikely to happen again? They're focused solely on the past. Realtors, we're still paying attention to the past. However, we also have to be able to, in a sense, predict what the market is going to do, like how the market is going to respond, especially when we're listing a home, all right? When we're helping a seller, we're having to predict, hey, what do you think is going to happen, right? You got all these different factors that are coming up. You got interest rates, you got presidential elections, you got just all the different things that are happening in the market, what's going on in the stock market, what's happening overseas. All these different things are happening, and that can have a very real impact on what the housing market looks like when you go to list that home, right? When you go to list it right now, we can go based off of, okay, here's what everything that we've seen that's happened, but we can't really look, or we don't have the luxury of paying attention solely to what happened in the past, because we're trying to predict what a current buyer or a future buyer is going to do when that home is on the market, right? So we have very different jobs and very different ways of things that we look at ways, but a lot of times we're still using the same factors and features when we're trying to determine what exactly a home is worth or how we're going to price a home or determine what that home's value is. And so, like I said, we're going to break it down into the 6 key factors that you're going to want to pay attention to. And these are things that you may want to keep in mind as well when you're trying to determine, hey, here's what I need to offer, or hey, here's what I want to put up for a particular house or something like that. There's a lot of things that you'll need to remember or that you may not have even known about until now, right? And so let's break down all 6 of them, why they're important, why you should focus on them, and why your brother-in-law or your uncle or your parents may not always be the best resource when you're trying to determine what exactly a home is worth. Right. So first up, let's talk about one of the biggest factors, and it may not be one that you realize would be first, and that is time. Right. When exactly did that sale happen? That's what we're always focusing on, right? So when we're trying to determine what a home's current value is, what we are often having to do is we're having to look at surrounding sales that have happened. Real estate is hyper-local, which means that what is happening in a certain area may not be happening in other areas, right? It's all in a certain location, a certain area. But in more cases, right, it's also important to figure out when exactly those sales took place. We're always trying to find what we call comparable sales, or comps for short, right? Whenever we're trying to determine what a home is worth, we want to find as many comparable sales, the more the better, right? But we're trying to find as many comparable sales to show, hey, here's what the house is worth, or here's what we think it is based on what the market is telling us. It's no different than if you tried to sell a couch or a piece of furniture on Marketplace. First thing you're going to do is you're going to look up to see how much it costs if you buy it new, but then also you're going to look to see what other people are selling it for on Marketplace, on eBay, right? You're going to see what other people are selling similar couches to that, right? And you want to find a piece of furniture or a piece of or an item that is as similar to what you're selling as possible, because that's going to give you your best guess of what you can sell it for. And it's no different when it comes to houses. We're trying to find comps to figure out what is the best price for this home, or the most likely price that this is going to sell for when it's put on the open market. And we pay a lot of attention to the time of when it actually sold, right? More often than not, we're usually, the sooner the better, right? I would prefer it to be a house that just sold yesterday, right? Because that's going to give me my most accurate idea of what's currently happening in the market. But again, that we don't always have that luxury. We usually have to look about 6 months back. That's usually about as far back as you want to look for recent sales. Depending on the area, you might be able to go back about a year or so. Once you get past a year, it's really kind of murky, right? That's a completely different market, right? It could be completely, things have changed. But whenever we're looking at comps, the first thing I want to look at is, when did that comp sell? If it sold recently, and when I say recently, I mean within the last 90 days, even sooner would be better. That's great. Those are the ones I'm trying to focus on, because those give me the best guess of what's happening in the market. You could make the argument that when it sold, or when that comparable home closed, is almost slightly, and I say slightly more important than the location. All right, we're always focused on, where is it located? Where is it? If you have a house that is very similar to yours, and it's directly across the street, right? Very similar, directly across the street, but it sold a year ago, and then you've got a house that is a mile away from your house, but that one, it's very similar, but it sold yesterday. I'm going to put way more emphasis on the house that's a mile away. Even though that one is directly across the street, I'm paying more attention to that one that sold most recently, because I know that that's giving me the most accurate indication of what's currently happening in the market, right? And so that's where you want to focus on that in many cases, right? So the first one is time. When did that comparable home, when did it close? When did it sell? And was it recently? The second thing we're going to focus on is, like I said, the location, right? You want it to be as close as possible to that house. Whenever I'm doing market analysis and trying to determine what a home is worth, I'm always going to start with that actual neighborhood first and then work my way out. I'm going to try to stay in the neighborhood if at all possible as much as I can, right? If I can find a bunch of comparable homes that are in that neighborhood that recently sold, I may not even bother going outside, right? I just want to focus on that particular area. Now, you may have to go a little bit further out to find more options, but the closer, the better. Usually a general guideline, they say you want to get to within a few miles, right? If it's like further than, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles, that's probably not the best comp, unless it's a rural area where there's not a lot of stuff nearby. But if you're in a pretty populated area in a city or a certain area or in the triangle or something like that, I'm usually trying to find stuff that's within a mile or two at most of that particular listing. Like I said, the closer, the better. The closer, the better. The more recent that it's sold, the better, right? So again, time, location, those are the first two things I'm focused on when I'm trying to find a comparable sale to this home. The next thing that I'm looking at is the style of the home, right? What type of home is it? Is it a single-story home? Is it a two-story home? What type of style is this particular property? Because that's going to change the way things go. The example I always use in many cases is when you're comparing a ranch home to a two-story home. Ranch homes, for one, they're more expensive to build because it's a larger foundation, right? So it usually requires a slightly larger plot of land to build those. But then also, not only that, a ranch home is more appealing to a larger pool of buyers, right? So you have some buyers who are like, I have to have a house that has no stairs, and some buyers who really don't care. And they're both competing with each other for this exact same property, right? And so there's a lot of times where a ranch home is going to sell for a higher price, even though it may be the same size as another two-story home. It's going to sell for a higher price simply for the fact that it's a more desirable home. It's got a larger pool of buyers vying for that particular property, right? And so if I'm doing a CMA and trying to determine pricing, I'm going to try my best not to try to compare a two-story home to a ranch home, right? So you want to pay attention to the style. Again, you're trying to find a home that is as similar as possible to that other property. I know a lot of times people like to bash the cookie cutter neighborhoods and say, oh, I don't want to live in a house or a neighborhood where my house looks the exact same as everybody else. That's fine. That's completely okay to do, but you have to understand that those also are going to be more difficult for you. The more unique your house is, the more difficult it is going to be to price. I can't tell you how many times I've been driving down the road and I'll see like these tiny little ranch homes or double wides, and then all of a sudden you see this massive mansion just pop up out of nowhere, and I'm thinking to myself like, man, I know it has got to be difficult to try to price that home because, again, it's surrounded by so many other things that are not similar at all, and you're having to go further and further out to find anything that even looks like that, right? And so, again, you want to find something that is a similar style to the other house that you're looking at. Fourth up, you want to pay attention to the size of the home, right? So the square footage is going to be a key factor that comes into play. And you don't want to get into a position where you are trying to compare homes that have drastically different square footages, right? Usually they tell us to stay, or you try to stay within about a 10% variance, right? And so if you've got a 1,500 square foot home, you'll probably try to find something that's no bigger than maybe 1,650 or 1,700 square feet, right? You try to stay within those kind of boundaries just so you're not comparing apples to oranges, right? You would never try to compare a 1,500 square foot home to a 4,000 square foot home, right? Because it's such a big difference, whatever, that you can't really compare it. It's a completely different pool of buyers. It's a completely different setup in the land. All the different things that could come into play or whatever. You just don't want to compare something that has that drastic of a difference. Again, you're trying to find something as similar as possible. And so the smaller that variance is with the size, the higher the likelihood that you've got an accurate comp that you're comparing it to. The fifth thing you want to look at is the features that are in the home, right? And so this is one of the ones that it's a little bit more subjective because Everyone has certain features that they prefer over others. But at the end of the day, you still want to try to make sure that you account for that, right? So the features could be anything from a garage. It could be a screen porch. It could be all new hardwoods all throughout the house, right? Sometimes it can get a little tricky, right? There are some times where people go, I spent $30,000 on these custom ceiling fans that I imported over from Italy, right? That may be the truth, right? That may be a very valuable piece of equipment, or a very valuable piece of ceiling fan. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, is the average buyer going to be willing to pay a premium on a house because it has nicer ceiling fans? More times that's not going to be the case, but again, we always try to take things into account. Again, it gets a lot more subjective once you start talking about features and what things people really value, right? If it's got a new roof or a new HVAC or a new water heater, but the kitchen is outdated, some buyers may value a updated kitchen more importantly than some of those other things. Not saying what's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that's just the way it typically goes, right? And so features are probably one of the trickiest things to do. But again, if you could find something that is as similar to your house as possible, that's going to be the best way for you to be able to tell whether or not that pricing is off, right? And so if you've got a house that's 60 years old, but it's been completely gutted and remade, hopefully there's another house or your house has been done in a similar manner, right? And then you kind of have to use that to kind of determine what works best. The last one, the sixth feature that you should focus on is the age of the home, right? And so again, you're trying to find stuff that's as similar as possible. You can't really compare a 100-year-old home or a 60-year-old home to a home that is 10 or 15 years old, right? It's just not the same. Again, you're comparing apples to oranges and stuff like that too. And so now granted, there are times where maybe the updates and stuff may give it a different effective age. Maybe they completely gutted it, but more times than not, you're usually making sure that you're not trying to compare a newer home to something that is older, something like that. You usually want to try to stay within 5 to 10 year variances, right? And so if I have a home that was built in 2000 and I see a comp that was built in 1960, I'm probably going to do everything I can to avoid using that comp. Sometimes you can't help it. Like if there's nothing else around there, you may have to get desperate and say, hey, I'll take it anyway and see if I can make adjustments for it. But more times than not, you want to find something that is as close or as similar in age to that home as possible. And that can help you determine, like I said, whether or not that pricing is well. Now, there are a ton of things that I did not reference, whatever, as far as that. But those 6 features, if you can keep those 6 things in mind when you're trying to determine what a house is worth, you're usually going to be well off and trying to figure things out, right? You cannot always go off of the algorithms that are out there, because a lot of those programs, you have to remember, have not actually set foot inside the home. They may not be aware of different changes or upgrades that were put in the home. You can't always go based solely off of price per square foot. Right, that's another popular one people look at and go, oh, my neighbor sold for $200 a square foot, so I can just multiply that by mine and voila, I have my pricing. The price per square foot, at least in our area, it doesn't take into account the garage. It doesn't take into account the screen porch. If there's an unfinished basement that isn't heated or cooled, none of those things are taken into consideration when you're looking at that. And so those numbers are often greatly skewed from the average price, right? So you can't just always look at that number. It's still important, but it's not the end all be all for whatever you're trying to figure out when you're doing that valuation. But again, if you focus on those 6 things, you should have a pretty accurate understanding of whether or not the house that you're looking at to determine your home's worth, if that's actually a good representation or a good comp to use in that situation. You're always trying to look and see what things are out there, right? But again, if you can focus on that, you won't likely be one of these people that is looking at, oh, well, this neighbor sold for this amount, so obviously my home is nicer than theirs, my home's better than theirs, whatever, and you don't take into account any of these other things. I've seen countless appointments and situations and showings where someone was under the belief or under the impression that a house was valued for completely different pricing or completely different valuation based off of something that was not a good comp or based off of something that was not a good representation of what homes are worth in that area. And so, again, you always want to make sure that you're paying attention to those things and have a firm understanding of it. And then last but not least, I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse and I'm constantly talking about this, but again, I cannot overemphasize the importance of having a realtor in your corner, because again, we are looking at houses, we are touring homes, we are doing listing appointments, we're doing this stuff on a regular basis, which means that we are going in and out of houses all the time, and we're getting feedback from people when we're touring these houses, right? And so where you may think, oh, like if I make this specific change or this specific upgrade, that's going to bump up my value. We know, based on what the market's telling us and based on what our clients are saying and feedback from different listings, we know exactly how that upgrade may be received on the market. And we can let you know, hey, just so you know, buyers are not valuing this particular feature as highly as you think they are, right? And so all those things are things that we can take into account, and those are things that you only know with experience, right? Like I said, you could look at all the 6 features that we talked about today. A lot of those you can look up online and see for yourself, but there's a whole other list of things that are taken into account and a whole other list of things that can change that valuation of the home that can only be known if you're working in the industry day in and day out. And so again, I wanted to make sure that you have a firm understanding of how pricing works yourself, but you're also willing to accept the advice from your realtor or from someone who's experienced working in that industry on a regular basis. And so if you guys ever have questions about how that works, I'm always happy to talk about it. Valuation is obviously one of the most important things that many people are concerned about and wanting to know more about and always interested in. And so I'm happy to sit down and discuss with people about like what pricing is doing, what things are most important, and how you can make sure that when it comes time for you to make your purchase, that you make a decision that is a wise financial decision and you feel good about it moving forward into the future. And so I hope that that's helpful for you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week.